I cleared my mom's mortgage, stocked the fridge with my own cash, and even footed my siblings' college application fees while they still called me lazy. Then, cleaning the attic, I discovered a sealed envelope addressed to me. The next morning I was gone, and by noon, my family's group chat was pleading with me to answer the phone. Can you even imagine dedicating 5 years of your life, secretly sacrificing everything to save your family home, only to be constantly called lazy, ungrateful, and a total burden by the very people you're saving? What would you do when you discover a hidden letter from your deceased dad that exposes a betrayal so deep it shatters everything you thought you knew about your own family? For years, that was my life. I'm Leo, I'm 27, and if you asked my family, they'd probably just shrug and say, "Oh, Leo? He's the lazy one." It's actually pretty hilarious, looking back, because for 5 long years, I'd been quietly, secretly, paying off the mortgage on my mom's house. I covered bills when they conveniently forgot, and even fronted my younger siblings' college application fees when they cried broke. But sit in our living room for 10 minutes, and you'd hear the same infuriating refrain. Leo never does anything. Leo's just coasting. Leo doesn't understand responsibility. I just sit there, biting my tongue, listening to the same people whose groceries I'd paid for gripe about how ungrateful I was or how lucky I was. Lucky. That word, man, it always hit a nerve. Lucky doesn't feel like staying up until 3 a.m., hunched over a laptop, working freelance jobs so your family doesn't lose their house. Lucky doesn't feel like walking into the bank with your mom, silently handing over the last payment, while she pretends her hard work cleared the debt. The disrespect started small, you know. I used to shrug it off, tell myself it wasn't worth fighting about. My older sister would crack jokes in front of friends. Leo's allergic to hard work. My younger brother would roll his eyes when I came home late, muttering something about how I slept all day anyway. And Mom, she didn't outright insult me, but the sighs, the shaking of her head when I mentioned a project I was working on, the way she compared me to cousins who had more normal jobs. It all just added up. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, that maybe they just didn't understand what I was really doing. But deep down I felt it. The resentment was building, a quiet, bitter hum every time I handed over my card to cover something, without so much as a thank you. The moment that still sits in my head like a splinter happened at dinner a few months ago. Mom had just come back from the store, bags overflowing with food. My sister laughed. Good thing Leo doesn't mind mooching. He eats enough to justify his existence. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. They all laughed. My mom, she didn't stop them. She just smiled, tight-lipped, like it was easier to let me be the punchline. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to say something, anything. To tell them I was the reason the lights stayed on, the reason they didn't have debt collectors calling every day. But the words just got stuck. If I said it, it would feel like bragging. If I didn't, I stayed the lazy one. So I kept quiet. But then came the attic. I was cleaning out boxes one Saturday because Mom suddenly needed more storage space for important things. My siblings, of course, were conveniently too busy. So up I went, dust in my hair, my shirt sticking to my back, hauling down boxes of old clothes and broken Christmas decorations. I was cursing under my breath when I found it. A small envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in my dad's handwriting. Dad had passed away years ago, and just seeing his writing again made my chest tighten. I sat down right there on the dusty floor, staring at it. Why was it hidden? Why hadn't anyone told me? I didn't open it immediately. I tucked it into my pocket, my hand shaking, and carried on with the boxes. That night, I barely slept. I kept the envelope on my nightstand, the weight of it pulling at my thoughts. I remembered Dad's voice, the way he used to call me his little problem solver. He always had a way of making me feel seen, even when everyone else overlooked me. Mom used to argue with him about me, though. She'd say, Leo needs to toughen up. He needs to stop dreaming. Dad would just chuckle and say, don't worry about Leo. He'll be fine. The envelope felt like one last message, one last secret he'd left just for me. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I opened it. My hands were sweating, so badly the paper nearly slipped out. Inside was a letter, short but heavy. My dad had written it the year before he died, and it explained something my family never, ever told me. I read it once, then twice, then again. My throat closed up. The words, they just shifted everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. Suddenly, so much of their behavior made a sickening kind of sense. The dismissiveness, the way they always downplayed me, the constant pressure to stay in my place. My hands trembled as I folded the letter back up. I didn't say a word. I went about the day like normal. Mom complaining about bills, my sister laughing at some meme about freeloaders, my brother asking me for gas money. I nodded, smiled faintly, and slipped the envelope into my bag. But inside, I was already gone. By the next morning, I had packed a bag. I didn't announce it, didn't leave a note. I just walked out. No one even noticed until noon. That's when my phone started buzzing nonstop. Calls, messages, group chat notifications. At first, they were angry. Where are you? This isn't funny. Then came the begging. Leo, please answer. We need to talk. And that was the moment I realized. They finally noticed I wasn't there. They finally felt the absence of the person they had dismissed for years. I sat on a bus, miles away, my bag at my feet, the letter heavy in my pocket, and my phone vibrating like a desperate heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. But here's the thing, what was in that letter? Why did it make me leave everything behind? And why did it have my family panicking within hours? I'll get to that. But first, you need to understand just how far the disrespect went before that envelope cracked everything wide open. When I think back on the years leading up to finding that envelope, I realize the disrespect wasn't just in passing moments. It was ingrained into everything. It was in the way family dinners always felt like performance reviews, where my siblings got praised for even the smallest accomplishments while I was reminded of all the things I hadn't done yet. It was in the way Mom would light up whenever my sister brought home a certificate from a school club, or my brother posted another gym selfie that got a bunch of likes. Meanwhile, when I finished a big project for a client, or saved up enough to quietly cover the electricity bill, it went unnoticed. Worse than unnoticed, it was treated like the bare minimum. I remember one Sunday afternoon when Mom had everyone over for lunch. My sister had just gotten an internship at a local law firm, and she strutted around the table like she'd been named partner. Mom kept bragging to relatives. She's going places. You'll see. She'll be the star of this family. My brother chimed in, grinning. And I'll probably be the athlete. Guess Leo will what? Keep the couch warm. The table erupted in laughter. I forced a chuckle, but inside my chest burned. They didn't know I had just landed a contract worth more than that entire internship would pay her all summer. But if I said it, I'd look like I was trying too hard. If I stayed quiet, I was the lazy brother with no direction. That's how it always went. I was the shadow that made their light shine brighter. The favoritism wasn't just in words. It seeped into actions, too. When my sister's car broke down, Mom dipped into savings to help her buy a new one. When my brother wanted to join an expensive sports program, she rearranged bills to make it work. But when I needed a small loan to upgrade some equipment for my freelance jobs, she shook her head and said, Leo, you need to learn to manage your money better. I didn't argue. Instead, I sold off a few personal things and figured it out myself. Ironically, the money I later earned from that investment was what ended up covering my brother's overdue tuition deposit when he forgot to pay it on time. And yet, when Mom told the story to relatives, she said, we all came together to help him out. By we all, she meant herself. My name never made the cut. It wasn't just the little things, either. There was this constant manipulation, subtle and not so subtle. If I didn't show up to a family gathering because I had a deadline, I'd get guilt-tripped. You know, family is all we really have, Mom would text. Don't make me explain to everyone why you're not here again. But when my siblings skipped events, oh, they're busy. They're working so hard. If I bought myself something nice, say, a new jacket after months of wearing the same old one, it was Leo's wasting money again. If I picked up groceries, it was expected, not appreciated. There was no winning. One evening, though, stands out crystal clear. We were sitting around after dinner, and Mom brought up the topic of the mortgage. She said something about how hard it had been to finally get it under control, how proud she was of herself for managing it. My fork froze midair. I had been making those payments for years, Quietly, consistently, without her ever asking. She knew, of course. There's no way she couldn't have noticed. But in front of everyone, she let them believe it was her burden and her victory. My sister clapped her on the back. See, Mom always makes it work. My brother smirked, tossing in, if you ever move out, how will you survive without her? I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. The envelope was still upstairs in the attic at that time, unopened, but I swear I felt a calling to me. There was another moment, one I didn't talk about for a long time. I had been saving for months, skipping small luxuries, no coffee runs, no new shoes, no weekend outings, because I wanted to surprise Mom for her birthday. I booked her a weekend at a nice little bed and breakfast out of town. Something quiet, peaceful, a break she always claimed she needed. When I gave her the gift, she blinked at it like she couldn't believe it. My siblings immediately scoffed. My sister muttered, probably used a coupon. My brother laughed, but it's one of those places where you have to clean the room yourself, right? And Mom, she smiled faintly, but the next week she canceled the trip, saying she was too busy, and never mentioned it again. Later, I overheard her on the phone bragging about how my sister bought her a fancy handbag. The handbag got 2 Instagram posts. My gift got nothing. That pattern kept repeating. No matter what I gave, it wasn't enough. No matter what I sacrificed, it went unseen. And the worst part, the gaslighting. If I ever tried to point out the imbalance, Mom would twist it. Oh, Leo, you're too sensitive. We joke because we love you. My sister would roll her eyes. You always want to be the victim. My brother would add, maybe if you actually did something worth bragging about, we'd notice. Those words stung. Not because they were true, but because they were so far from the truth, I didn't even know how to defend myself without spilling every secret contribution I had made. Meanwhile, the group chat was its own battlefield. Whenever I posted something about my work, it got ignored. But if my siblings so much as sneezed, there were a dozen congrats and heart emojis. Once, I shared that I'd finished a big contract and hit a personal milestone. Silence. 2 days later, my sister posted about finishing a 5K run. The chat blew up with, so proud of you. Amazing. Mom even replied with, that's my girl. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. And yet, despite all this, I stayed. I kept giving because that's what I thought family meant. Showing up even when it hurt. But looking back, I think a part of me was waiting. Waiting for a moment where the scales tipped so far I couldn't ignore them anymore. That moment came not long after I found the envelope. We were sitting in the living room on a Saturday night. Mom had ordered takeout, paid for with my card, though no one acknowledged that fact. My sister was scrolling on her phone, and my brother was showing off some new gadget. Then out of nowhere, Mom sighed and said, you know, sometimes I worry about Leo. What will he do when I'm not here to help him? My sister laughed. Probably move in with me. My brother added, he can always sleep on the couch in my garage. They all laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. My jaw tightened. That was the exact moment I knew I couldn't tell them about the envelope. Not yet. Because the truth inside that letter, it would destroy the fragile little narrative they'd built about who I was. And part of me wanted to watch that happen, to let them keep digging the hole deeper until the ground gave way under them. So, I smiled faintly, pretending their jokes didn't gut me, and quietly planned my next move. And when the day finally came that I packed my bag and slipped away before sunrise, that letter burning a hole in my pocket, it wasn't just an escape. It was the first step towards something much bigger. But before I tell you what was inside that letter, you need to see just how far they went and how deep the manipulation cut before everything snapped. The thing about betrayal is that it never comes all at once. It builds, layer by layer, until one day it finally spills over. Looking back, I can see all the cracks forming, all the little warnings I ignored. But in the moment it finally happened, it hit me like a sucker punch I never saw coming. It was early spring, a couple of weeks after I found the envelope in the attic. I was carrying it everywhere by then, tucked deep in my bag, folded so many times the paper was starting to crease at the edges. I hadn't told anyone about it. Not Mom, not my sister, not my brother. It felt like mine, one of the only things in my life that belonged to me alone. But the letter had also changed the way I saw everything. Every laugh at my expense, every dismissive shrug, every eye roll suddenly felt sharper. Like now I understood why they needed me to stay lazy. Leo, the failure who never quite measured up. The betrayal started quietly, like most things do. I came home one afternoon to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table with my sister and brother. They stopped talking the moment I walked in. You know that silence where you can almost hear the words they don't want you to hear still hanging in the air? That's what it felt like. I asked casually, "What's up?" Mom forced a smile and said, "Oh, just family stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." The way she said it made my stomach twist. I'd heard that tone my whole life. The tone that said, "You're not really part of this." A few days later, I found out what the family stuff was. My sister slipped up. She was bragging to a cousin about how Mom finally agreed to put the house in our names. Well, mine and my brother's. "About time," she'd said. I froze when I overheard it. Put the house in their names. Our names. I'd been the one making payments for years. I confronted Mom that night, and she looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "Leo," she said, sighing as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "You know how unreliable your work is. The house has to stay secure. Your sister and brother will take care of it." I just stared at her. My voice came out low, steady but shaking inside. "Take care of it?" "Mom, I already did." I paid it off. For a split second, her mask cracked. Her eyes flickered like she didn't expect me to say it out loud. But then she recovered, shaking her head. "You've contributed, yes, but it's not the same. Your siblings are more stable." My sister smirked from the couch, not even trying to hide it. My brother added, "Don't worry, Leo. We'll let you crash here if things ever get tough." That was the first time I felt it. Pure, raw betrayal. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the lie, the rewriting of history, the decision to erase me from something I had bled for. I wanted to scream, to throw the envelope in their faces, to read Dad's words out loud right then and there. But I didn't. I swallowed it, turned, and walked to my room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely shut the door. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, the betrayal got worse. I came home late one evening after finishing a project. The lights were on, voices echoing from the living room. I pushed the door open and froze. Spread out on the coffee table were papers, bank statements, receipts, even a few of my pay stubs. My pay stubs! My sister was holding one up like evidence in a trial. "See, he's been making more than he tells us." My brother whistled low. "No wonder he can buy random junk. He's been hiding money." Mom just sat there, tight-lipped, like she was a judge presiding over my sentencing. My heart pounded. "What are you doing with my stuff?" I demanded. Mom didn't flinch. "We found them while tidying up." "You should have been honest, Leo. Family doesn't hide things." I laughed bitterly. "Family doesn't snoop through my room, either." My sister jumped in, her voice sharp. "You've been lying for years, pretending you're broke, making us feel guilty for asking for help when you've been hoarding money all this time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Oh, hoarding? Are you kidding me? Who do you think covered your tuition deposit last year? Who do you think paid for the groceries last week? Who do you think?" Mom cut me off. "Enough. We're not ungrateful, but you can't keep secrets from us. This family needs transparency." Transparency. That word made me want to break something. I had been transparent my whole life in the form of being invisible. They only noticed me when they needed something, when my wallet was the answer to their problems. And now, because I hadn't broadcasted every penny I made, I was suddenly the villain? The room blurred for a second, my chest tight. That's when my sister delivered the blow that would stick with me forever. She leaned back, smirking, and said, "Honestly, it's pathetic. You're almost 30, and you still don't have a real career. You hide behind your little projects, and then act like you're doing us a favor. Maybe you should just give Mom control of your finances, so they're not wasted." I swear, the air just went out of the room. Give Mom control of my finances? My hard-earned money, the only thing I had that was truly mine? My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. My brother snickered. Not a bad idea. Then at least the money would go to something useful. And Mom didn't disagree. She just sat there staring at me like it was a reasonable suggestion. That was the moment. The exact second something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just went cold. My voice came out like ice. You want control? Fine. You can control the groceries, the bills, the house, all the things I've been paying for. But my money, my work, that's mine. My sister rolled her eyes. Relax. We were just saying. I cut her off. No, you weren't just saying. You were planning. They didn't answer. Their silence was louder than any confession. I walked out of the room, into mine, and shut the door. I sat on the bed, shaking, staring at the bag where the envelope was hidden. For years, I had kept quiet. For years, I had let them paint me as the lazy one, the ungrateful one, the shadow in the family portrait. But now I had proof. Proof in Dad's own handwriting that everything they thought they controlled wasn't theirs to take. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to their muffled laughter down the hall, and I knew something had broken, something that couldn't be fixed. And as the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I made a decision. The envelope wasn't just mine anymore. It was my weapon. But I wasn't going to use it yet. Not until they pushed me one step further. And believe me, they did. When people talk about hitting rock bottom, they usually describe a single moment, like falling off a cliff and landing hard. But for me, it didn't happen all at once. It was more like being buried alive, inch by inch, until I realized I couldn't breathe anymore. After the night they suggested Mom should take over my finances, something in the house shifted. It wasn't just the betrayal of them digging through my private things. It was the way they carried on afterward, as if nothing had happened. As if they hadn't crossed a line they could never uncross. The morning after, Mom greeted me in the kitchen with her usual flat smile. "There's cereal," she said, sliding the box across the table, like she hadn't sat there the night before while my sister called me pathetic, like she hadn't considered taking the one thing I had left that was truly mine. My brother wandered in, yawning, ruffling my hair like I was still a kid, and said, "Don't stress about last night. Leo, we're just looking out for you. Looking out for me." The phrase made my stomach twist. They weren't looking out for me. They were circling me like vultures, waiting for something to die. That week was suffocating. Everywhere I turned, I felt the weight of their judgment. My sister started dropping comments in group chats about how unfair it was that some of us carry more responsibility than others. My brother made jokes in front of his friends about how I was the family ghost. Always around, never really seen, but somehow haunting the fridge. And Mom, she doubled down on her subtle digs. "Leo, maybe you should shadow your brother at the gym, learn some discipline. Or Leo, I know you're busy, but maybe consider picking up something stable like retail, just for the experience." Every time they spoke, I wanted to scream the truth. That I was the reason their light stayed on. The reason Mom had a roof over her head, the reason my siblings had a chance at their future. But I didn't. I kept swallowing it, letting it sit like a stone in my chest. Because a part of me had already decided they weren't worth the explanation. But silence came at a cost. The stress started eating me alive. I stopped sleeping. My appetite vanished. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced someone was going through my things again. I kept the envelope tucked under my pillow now, like a child with a secret treasure, terrified it would be stolen. I checked it 3, 4 times a day, running my fingers over the crease to make sure it was still there. Work became harder, too. I'd sit at my laptop trying to focus on a project, but my brain kept looping back to their voices. Pathetic, lazy, unstable. The words dug grooves in my mind, replaying on a loop until I started to wonder if they were right. Maybe I was nothing. Maybe I really was the useless one they always said I was. The thought terrified me more than anything, that after all these years, all my quiet sacrifices, maybe they had convinced me too. One night I broke. I was sitting alone in the living room while everyone else was out. The house was silent, but my head was buzzing. I stared at the blank TV screen, my reflection looking back at me, dark circles under my eyes, shoulders hunched like I was carrying something too heavy to put down. And in that moment, I hated myself for staying, for giving, and giving to people who saw me as nothing more than a punchline. For letting them drain me dry without ever demanding even a shred of gratitude. I almost ripped the envelope open again just to reassure myself it was real, that Dad's words weren't some hallucination, that the truth I carried actually existed. But instead, I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "I can't do this anymore." The words echoed in the empty room, and hearing them out loud scared me because they felt final. The next morning, I started planning, though at first it didn't look like planning. It looked like pulling away. I stopped volunteering to cover bills. When Mom sighed about groceries, I shrugged and said, "Not this time." Her eyebrows shot up, but she didn't argue. When my brother asked for gas money, I told him I didn't have it. He laughed like I was joking, then frowned when he realized I wasn't. My sister hinted about needing help with a subscription fee. I ignored the message. It wasn't easy. They noticed. They didn't like it. The air in the house grew colder. Mom would mutter about how some people don't understand family responsibility. My siblings sent passive-aggressive texts. "Guess we know who we can't count on." I felt the shift, felt the way they were closing ranks against me. But instead of breaking me, it gave me clarity. This was what they really thought of me when I wasn't useful. And it made me realize I didn't want to be useful to them anymore. Still, the guilt clawed at me. Every time Mom sighed about bills, every time my siblings pouted, that old instinct flared. To fix it, to make it easier for them, I had to fight it, reminding myself of the night at the table, of their laughter, of the way they had looked at my pay stubs like vultures, reminding myself of the envelope, of Dad's words written just for me. He hadn't left that letter for my sister or brother. He had left it for me. There was one night when it all came crashing down. My true rock bottom. Mom had hosted another dinner, a family bonding night. I didn't want to go, but she guilt-tripped me with the usual. It means so much when we're all together. So, I sat there quiet, pushing food around my plate while my siblings carried on. At some point, Mom raised a glass and said, "To the future, the bright future of this family." She looked at my sister, our rising star. She looked at my brother, our athlete, our fighter. Then she glanced at me, her eyes lingering just long enough to twist the knife, and said nothing. The table clinked with laughter and cheers, glasses raised high. Mine stayed on the table untouched. I excused myself early, slipping out into the night air. My chest ached so badly I thought I might collapse on the sidewalk. That was the moment I realized they would never see me. No matter what I gave, no matter what I did, they would never raise a glass for me. I could hand them the world, and they'd still call me lazy for not doing it with a smile. And so, quietly, I began planning my exit. Not just skipping bills or ignoring requests, but really planning. I started moving my savings to a separate account they didn't know about. I began reaching out to clients in other cities, testing the waters to see where I could land if I left. I even started packing small things in a bag I kept hidden in the back of my closet. Nothing obvious yet, just enough to know I was ready when the moment came. The house felt different after that. Colder, lonelier, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. The thought of leaving terrified me, but it also lit something inside me. Hope, maybe, or defiance. I wasn't sure yet. All I knew was that rock bottom wasn't just about being broken. It was about realizing you couldn't sink any further, and that maybe, just maybe, you were ready to climb out. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the envelope under my pillow, I whispered to myself again, "Not much longer." I didn't know when the breaking point would come, but I knew it was coming, and when it did, I would be ready. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that after the dust settles, there's only one direction left to go. At first, it didn't feel like a rise. It felt like survival. My mornings were still heavy, my nights restless, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small acts of reclaiming myself. The first time I said no to covering groceries and didn't flinch when Mom sighed, I felt something flicker inside me. Power, maybe. The first time my brother asked for just $20, and I shrugged without offering, I caught the brief flicker of annoyance in his eyes, and it felt like a victory. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wasn't bleeding myself dry anymore. I poured that energy back into my work. 4 years, I had treated my freelance projects like something temporary, something I had to justify to my family. But now, I leaned into it with both hands. I picked up extra clients. I invested in better tools. I even started networking online, joining communities of people who actually respected the kind of work I did. The first time someone messaged me saying, "Hey, Leo, I've been following your work. It's inspiring." I stared at the screen for a long time. It felt foreign, hearing respect without strings attached. And then the money followed. At first, just a little more than usual. Enough to pay my bills comfortably and still have some left over. Then a bigger project landed. A contract from a company out of state that wanted me to work on a long-term basis. The kind of job that could change everything. I remember the night I signed it. I sat alone in my room, the contract glowing on my laptop screen, my heart pounding. I wanted to shout, to tell someone, to share the win. But I didn't. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the quiet pride wash over me. This one was mine. I started saving aggressively. Every paycheck I funneled into the hidden account. Watching the numbers climb gave me a kind of satisfaction I'd never felt before. It wasn't just about money. It was about proof. Proof that I wasn't who they said I was. Proof that I could stand on my own. The envelope stayed with me through all of it. Every time I questioned myself, every time my sister's smirk or my brother's laugh echoed in my mind, I'd pull it out and reread Dad's words. They grounded me. They reminded me why I was doing this. The letter wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a compass, pointing me toward a future that was mine, not theirs. Of course, the family didn't notice the changes at first. They were too wrapped up in themselves. My sister had started her law internship, strutting around like she owned the world. My brother was busy chasing some new athletic dream, posting pictures online with captions like "Rise and Grind." Mom was still playing referee, praising them at every turn, and tossing me scraps of attention only when she needed something. To them, I was still lazy Leo, the kid who never left his room. But I noticed how I no longer felt my chest tighten every time the mail came because I wasn't scrambling to cover bills. I noticed how I could buy myself a decent meal without guilt. I noticed how my work stopped feeling like a secret shame and started feeling like a future. And then something unexpected happened. One of my clients flew me out to meet their team. It was the first time I traveled for work. I didn't tell my family. I just packed my bag, boarded the plane, and went. For 3 days, I was treated with respect. People shook my hand, asked for my opinion, valued my skills. I was no one's punchline there. On the last night, the team took me to dinner, and the manager raised a glass to Leo, our problem solver. The words hit me so hard, I almost choked. Problem solver. That was exactly what Dad used to call me. I smiled, raised my glass, and for the first time in years, I believed it. When I came home, I didn't tell them about the trip, but they noticed something was different. My sister raised an eyebrow when I walked in wearing a new jacket, one I'd bought with my own money without guilt. My brother asked, half joking, "Win the lottery or something?" I shrugged. Mom gave me a look, narrowed eyes, calculating, like she knew something had shifted but couldn't put her finger on it. The more I pulled away, the harder they pushed. Mom guilt-tripped me about missing family dinners. My sister sent messages dripping with sarcasm. "Don't work too hard, Leo. Wouldn't want you to strain yourself." My brother poked at me, trying to drag me into arguments. But their words didn't land the same anymore. I wasn't starving for their approval. I had proof in contracts, in paychecks, in savings, that I was more than what they thought. The cracks in their control showed one night at dinner. Mom brought up finances again, complaining about bills. My sister sighed dramatically. Well, if Leo would finally step up. I cut her off. "Calm, steady. I have stepped up more than you know. But from now on, I'm only taking care of myself." The room went silent. My sister's mouth hung open. My brother snorted like I was bluffing. Mom looked at me with something close to panic flickering in her eyes. That was when I realized the truth. They needed me more than I needed them. They always had. From then on, I walked lighter. I started eating meals out just to taste freedom. I bought a new laptop, an investment in my future. I even started looking at apartments online, scrolling through listings late at night like they were windows into a new life. And the more I rose, the more the resentment at home grew. My siblings couldn't stand it when I brushed off their comments. Mom couldn't handle not knowing where my money was going. The balance of power was shifting, and they felt it. But I didn't flaunt it. I stayed quiet, steady, patient. Because I knew the real power wasn't in showing them yet. It was in knowing I could. And all the while, the envelope sat in my drawer waiting. Dad's words, my final card to play. The one truth that could shatter everything they believed. I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. I wanted them to push just a little further, to reveal just how far their greed and entitlement would go. Because the higher I climbed, the harder they were going to fall. And as much as I had started to taste success, I knew this was only the beginning. The rise was mine, but the reckoning was still to come. The more I pulled away from my family, the more I noticed two things. First, they were far more dependent on me than I ever realized. And second, their entire sense of control over me was built on assumptions. Assumptions that I would always cave, always give, always stay. The day I stopped feeding into that system, the cracks started to widen. It began with the bills. I hadn't paid for groceries or utilities in weeks, and suddenly the fridge was empty, the Wi-Fi cut out, and Mom was scrambling. I overheard her on the phone one night whispering frantically to my sister, "I don't know how I'll make this work without Leo pitching in." I sat in my room, silent, staring at the glow of my savings account on my laptop screen, and it struck me. I wasn't powerless. I was the one holding the strings all along. That realization grew into something bigger the day I got a call from the company I had signed that long-term contract with. They wanted to extend me an offer, full-time, remote with benefits, and if I was open to it, relocation support. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to fund my independence without ever needing to look back. I remember staring at the email, my hands trembling, the envelope resting just inches away on my desk. Dad's words had told me I was capable of more than they would ever admit. And here it was, proof in numbers on a screen. I didn't tell my family, not a word. Instead, I started laying the groundwork quietly. I opened a new account under my name only, rerouting payments there. I spoke with a real estate agent in another city, pretending to just be curious, but really scouting my options. I even toured a few apartments virtually, picturing myself in them, free of the weight that clung to every corner of the house I still lived in. The funny thing is, the less they knew, the more they pressed. My sister grew nosier, asking sly questions at dinner like, "So Leo, what do you even do all day? Must be nice having endless free time." My brother dug harder, too, once even trying to grab my laptop when I left it open. I caught him before he could click anything, yanking it back so fast he laughed awkwardly, muttering, "Relax, man, I was just curious." Mom, though, she was the worst. She began planting ideas in conversation, little hooks disguised as care. "Leo, you should think about consolidating your money. You know, it's safer when family helps manage it." Or, "Leo, I worry about you. If anything happened, how would you handle it alone?" Each word was dipped in honey, but carried the bite of her real intention, control. I didn't bite. Not anymore. And then the turning point arrived, not from my success, but from their desperation. One night, I came home late from meeting a client for dinner. The house was dark except for the glow of the living room lamp. I heard voices, hushed but sharp, and when I crept closer, I realized Mom, my sister, and my brother were sitting around the table with a pile of papers. My stomach dropped when I saw one of them, an old envelope of mine, torn open, with documents spilling out, bank statements, contracts, and receipts. My sister was scribbling notes like she was preparing a case against me. Mom's voice was low, steady. "He has more money than he lets on. If he thinks he can just keep it to himself while we struggle." My brother cut in. "We need a plan. He's not going to hand it over. We've got to make him." My skin prickled cold. I backed away before they could notice me, retreating to my room with my heart pounding in my ears. They were planning to corner me, maybe even trap me into signing something. And that's when it hit me. The letter. I had never shared its contents, but now, in the quiet of my room, I pulled it out again. Dad's handwriting was fading slightly from how many times I'd unfolded it. The words still struck me like lightning. "Leo, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. This house, everything tied to it, it's yours. I made arrangements before I passed to insure it. Your mother doesn't know. Not yet. And I trust you'll do what's right when the time comes. You're stronger than they think. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Dad." The legal documents had been attached, too, tucked neatly behind the letter. Property transfer papers, notarized, sealed. I hadn't shown them to anyone, but I understood now. This was my shield, and one day my sword. For years, they had laughed at me, called me lazy, acted like the house was theirs to control. But the truth, the undeniable truth in black and white, was that it belonged to me. And if I played my cards right, I could use that to unravel everything they thought they owned. That night, I started copying everything, scanning documents, backing them up, making sure I had proof no one could take away. I spoke quietly to a lawyer, a friend of one of my clients, who confirmed everything legally. Leo, this property is yours. They can't change that. Not unless you agree to it. His words were a bomb and a spark all at once. I didn't show my hand. Not yet. Instead, I let them stew. I let them think they still had the upper hand, even as I built mine behind the scenes. I tightened my circle, cut off every access they had to my accounts, and started preparing for the day I would walk away. Not as the lazy brother they mocked, but as the man who held all the cards. Meanwhile, my success kept growing. The company finalized my relocation package, offering to set me up in a new city with housing support. My savings reached a number I had only dreamed of, and I started imagining the day I'd leave. Not sneaking out in shame, but walking out with my head high, knowing they'd be left scrambling. The envelope, Dad's last gift, wasn't just paper anymore. It was leverage. It was power. And more than anything, it was freedom. I didn't know exactly how the revenge would unfold yet, but I knew this. When the moment came, I wouldn't just walk away. I'd make sure they felt every ounce of the weight they had dumped on me. And as I lay awake one night, listening to their voices bickering down the hall about money, I smiled faintly. They had no idea how close they were to losing everything. They always expected me to snap. They expected the melodrama, the tears, a big scene, a late-night argument where I begged for respect, begged to be seen. They didn't know me at all. I'd been quiet for years, sure, but the quiet had a plan. The setup was done. Now, it was time for the move. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted clean lines and consequences that would be easy to point to, impossible for them to gaslight away. Dad's letter gave me one. The paperwork he tucked behind it, official, notarized, dated, gave me another. The law backed me. I'd confirmed everything with a lawyer and made copies of every relevant document, all encrypted and stored in places they wouldn't find. I arranged my exit so it would be antiseptic. No shouting matches that made me look like the villain. No emotional blackmail that let them spin their version of the truth. I was going to expose them with facts. First, I closed the door on access. I changed passwords, moved money, canceled any joint cards they'd used, and most importantly, I changed the utility authorizations so my name was the only one on the accounts. It wasn't vindictive. It was practical. If they'd been draining the house and planning to wrest control, I didn't want a single wire or bill to keep me tethered. I set up automatic payments for things I was still legally obligated to cover for a limited time. Not forever, just long enough to prevent an immediate emergency that could be blamed on me later. I wasn't cruel. I was deliberate. Then, I engaged the lawyer quietly to start a formal transfer process. Nobody in the family had any idea what I was doing because up until that point, they genuinely thought the house, and by extension their future security, was theirs to fight over. They were planning to strong-arm me into handing it all over to convince me that I was irresponsible and needed help. I'd let them circle the carcass. I wanted to see how bold they would be when they thought the prize was theirs. The day I set everything in motion, I took a train out of town. I returned only in the evening when the house was full. The timing was intentional. My sister had scheduled a family celebration for some trivial thing and invited a couple of relatives. They were all laughing, glasses raised, the house smelling like food and fake comfort. Mom had her proud face on for everyone. My brother was showing off something he bought on credit. It was the same scene I'd watched 100 times, except this time I had the documentation in my pocket and the lawyer on speed dial. I didn't make a scene walking in. People noticed me, of course they did, but they assumed I was still the passive Leo, the background fixture. Mom glanced at me the way she always had, an almost pitying lift of the eyebrows. My sister gave me a stage smile. They thought they still had me. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a drink like I belonged. I sat at the table and watched them. I listened to the little jokes that grazed beneath the surface. How Mom kept telling the cousins with a grin about the sacrifices she made. How my sister spoke as if she already owned the future. Each sentence was a needle they used to stitch their story. I set my drink down, slowly, and then I placed the envelope, sealed, creased, unmistakable, right there on the table in front of Mom. I slid it so her fingers brushed the paper when she reached for her glass. For a second, she didn't react. Then her hand recoiled like she touched something hot. My sister's smile faltered. The room's volume washed lower, but didn't stop. Someone asked, "Leo, what's that?" in the kind of voice you use when you think the answer will be a joke. I kept my voice steady. Composure feels dangerous to people who are used to chaos. I looked at Mom. "Open it," I said. She laughed a little, brittle. "What is it?" "A bill." She stopped, because the envelope had my name on it in Dad's handwriting. That paused the room. People love drama, but they hated anything that could not be easily reshaped into the narrative they preferred. They looked from the envelope to me like they were trying to see what angle they could twist it into later. Mom broke first. Her fingers trembled as she slit the flap and pulled out the folded paper. I let her read, let the silence do the work. As she took in the words, her face went colorless. My sister leaned over, demanding to see. My brother stood up like he might grab it from her hands. "Don't," I said. They froze. The command had an edge to it they weren't used to hearing. I watched Mom read the part where Dad explicitly named me and arranged the transfer. I watched the smile die on her face as she realized she hadn't been lied to so much as purposely excluded. That realness, Dad's handwriting, the legal ease, was the opposite of rumor. It could not be smoothed away by a later bedtime apology. "How?" Mom started, then swallowed. The words didn't come easy. She looked like someone discovering a tooth had fallen out. Surprised, then embarrassed, then angry. "Dad arranged it before he passed," I said simply. "He left instructions with a lawyer. This transfer was notarized. He wanted me to have the house." My sister's voice rose. The superiority, an entitlement that had never left her coming to the surface. "What are you saying? That he left it to you? That can't. Why would he? Why would he? Why would he?" I echoed. "Because he trusted me. Because he knew what would happen if he didn't. He knew who would try to take it." I kept my eyes on her, quietly naming them. Sometimes naming is its own punishment. They had to hear themselves described. The room tried to rebalance, to twist the story. "Are you sure?" my cousin asked. Because people always ask that when a truth is inconvenient. "Maybe the lawyer made a mistake." "I confirmed with the lawyer 2 weeks ago," I said. "Everything's in order. The property is legally mine." The laughter that had been in the room faded. For the first time in years, their faces had to reconcile cold facts with their preferred illusion. It wasn't pleasant. Mom's mouth worked like she was rehearsing a protest, a performance she'd used successfully before when someone else dared challenge the narrative. My sister's jaw clenched. My brother looked like he might say something cruel to cover his shock. But the truth had already done what it needed to. It had dismantled the bedrock of their assumptions. They'd been relying on the unspoken rule that I would always give, that my life was an endless resource. The letter removed that assumption. I didn't plan to strip them of everything in one public act. Revenge, to me, was far better executed as a series of small, precise moves that left them exposed and scrambling, rather than a single theatrical takedown that let them paint me as unstable. So I executed the next phase quietly, smartly. First, I froze their access to certain house-related bank accounts. The accounts in question were the ones they had been using to funnel their emergencies through. I had the legal standing to reassign authorization on the house-related accounts because the property legally belonged to me. I didn't do it out of spite, so much as to protect the asset and force their dependency to show its teeth. The moment I initiated the freeze, I called the lawyer and had a formal notice drafted that explained the reassignments and the legal justifications. It was professional and unemotional. Angry people sound ridiculous when they try to argue with paperwork. Then I waited to see how they'd react. Power, I'd learned, is often revealed in how people scramble when comfortable sources of support vanish. My sister started with texts, passive-aggressive, then pleading, then threatening. "You have no idea what you're doing to Mom," she wrote. My brother phoned his friends, trying to marshal sympathy. Mom sent me a message that went from pleading to bargaining. "Leo, please, you don't have to do this. We can talk." I made mistakes, but I responded once. Concise. We've had plenty of time to talk. This is legal. I'll discuss terms through my lawyer. When they realized the legal path was immovable, panic moved into bravado. My sister tried to rally relatives, spinning the story into a morality play. The poor mother, her son is heartless. I watched as my carefully backed up documents were turned into talking points for pity. It was pathetic and sad. The best part wasn't the panic. It was watching them attempt to rebuild their narratives, only to be cut off by evidence. They tried the old tactics: guilt, public shame, claims about my instability. But when you have notarized documents and a lawyer willing to speak on the record, people's mouths close. The relatives who had been so eager with advice suddenly had nothing to offer but uncomfortable silence. But as smart as I had been, I didn't expect the next move. In the middle of their scrambling, Mom did what I might have done if everything I loved was threatened. She called in favors. She reached out to an old friend who worked at the city records office, softly asking if anything could be done to slow the paperwork, to buy time. That friend was careful, circumspect, and utterly human. She warned Mom what I already knew. Legal transfers are a slow machine, but once set in motion and backed by notarized documentation, they're hard to unravel. The friend's sympathy didn't change the facts. It only increased Mom's desperation. Seeing her panic made something dark and cold in me click into place. I could remove their safety net without so much as raising my voice. I could do it in a way that exposed their dependence in front of anyone who cared to watch. I thought about calling every relative who had ever sided with them, forwarding clean copies of Dad's letter and the supporting documents, letting the truth spread not as gossip but as a confirmable reality. I imagined their faces when the cousins who'd praised Mom found out how she'd painted the story. I smiled at the thought, but revenge has to land hard and right. So, I staged the next beat to be public enough to humiliate, but controlled enough to be unassailable. A week later, I invited everyone to a family meeting. I didn't give details. I chose the afternoon because most people would be free, and because daylight keeps theatrics honest. The invitation message said nothing dramatic, just a time, a place, and a suggestion that we talk about the house and family plans. My sister rolled her eyes, but RSVP'd. Mom, of course, agreed. It was perfect. They all assumed I'd come groveling, or worse, make a spectacle. They didn't realize that the spectacle would be procedural and final. They arrived in suits and dresses, maintaining their practiced faces. I welcomed them politely. I asked Mom to sit. I asked my sister to put her phone away. The living room seemed to hold its breath. I had the lawyer on speakerphone in case anyone tried to derail with questions about specifics. Having a neutral professional present made interruptions look like juvenile attempts at chaos. The lawyer outlined the facts calmly. Dad's directive, notarized transfers, the legal status, what the changes meant for access to accounts, and decision-making authority. He spoke like a man reading terms of service. Monotone, implacable, unromantic. People started to react, some with tears, some with outrage, some with that theatrical disbelief you see in bad movies. My sister accused me of tearing the family apart. Mom begged for a delay, for mercy, for one last chance to do right. My brother tried to play the macho card, saying he'd figure this out and would take care of things. Each defense looked small under the cold, precise facts that sat between us like a third party that could not be negotiated with. When the lawyer finished, I reached into my pocket and pulled out copies of the documents, handing them to Mom and my sister. I watched their hands tremble as they read. When they reached the paragraph where Dad clearly stated his intent, their faces changed from theatrical indignation to raw, private shame. You could see the memory searching happen. Times when Dad had smiled at me. Little offhand things he'd said that suddenly sounded like preparation rather than poor parenting. The grief that followed looked ugly on them because it had to be processed without the protective narrative they had used for years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I let the facts do everything. People left the room looking hollowed out. The friends who had been at the gathering watched and then drifted away, awkwardly offering condolences to the wrong person. The group chat filled with relatives taking sides, gossip spinning, but the legal facts were already stamped, notarized, recorded, certified. The truth travels slower than a rumor, but is heavier when it lands. That night, The house felt strange, less like their refuge and more like an object they had been shown could belong to someone else. My sister stormed into my room, accusing me of being cruel. Mom called me every name in the book, trying to make me feel small. My brother tried to bargain. I listened to each one without replying for a long time. Then I said simply, "You began this by trying to erase me. I'm finishing it by making it impossible." That line used to be a dramatic turn of phrase in a movie, saying it felt oddly small in real life. But I wasn't done. Revenge, to me, wasn't only about taking a title or freezing an account. It was about visibility, letting everyone who had ever cheered for them know who had really been carrying the load. I forwarded copies of the letter and the legal documents to a handful of relatives who had been most loudly supportive of Mom and my siblings. People who had once scolded me for being lazy. I didn't editorialize. I let the paperwork speak. The reactions were swift. Calls came in that night full of confusion and apologies and questions to which Mom and my siblings had no easy answers. That drip feed of social consequence was more painful than any single slap. Still, in the middle of the small, cold victories, there was one variable I hadn't been able to control. Human pride. My sister refused to be seen as the one who had lost. She vowed to fight, to gather evidence of the mistake, to prove Dad had been coerced. My brother made loud threats about making things difficult. Mom teetered between pleading and righteous anger. I had mapped out legal avenues and social consequences, but people's stubbornness can turn even the cleanest plans messy. That's when I felt something else shift, an instinctive, almost animal reaction from them that made me realize they would not go quietly. They would claw. The night before, I planned to sign the final transfer confirmations with a lawyer, just to seal everything so there was no going back. I locked my account access and prepared for the storm. I double-checked backups, moved some funds further out, updated my relocation arrangements. I'd arranged to fly out in the morning, leaving a forwarding address and a noted power of attorney with my lawyer to handle necessary house logistics. No more reasons for them to claim abandonment, and no more opportunities for late, manipulative phone calls. And then, at 2 a.m, my phone started blowing up. It was the family group chat. The messages were frantic and strange, half pleading, half accusatory. Someone had taken a photo. My envelope had been pictured on the kitchen table with someone's hands in the frame. The caption read, "He's planning to run. He's leaving us." Panic, shame, denial. It was like watching a small fire start, something I had expected, but at a scale that felt suddenly more volatile. I stared at the screen, heart slowing, and realized that everything had reached the point of either collapse or exposure. The lawyer's office was open early. My flight was in a few hours. The plan had been to leave the house, let the legal machinery do its work, and handle the fallout from a distance where they couldn't manipulate me in person. That distance felt sanctifying until I thought about what would happen if they chose a different path. They had options. They could accept it, sulk, and try to rebuild an argument of their own. Or they could fight. And if they fought, the kind of fight they seemed prepared to launch wouldn't be pretty. They might call relatives, social services, anyone who could lend them public sympathy. They might try to challenge the notarization. They might even threaten to make a public spectacle, spinning a narrative that I'd abandoned them and was now using legal maneuvers to steal family property out of spite. I had considered all of that. I had contingency plans for each. But the frantic energy in the group chat told me something else, something raw. They were panicking because they were finally feeling the loss they had never felt when I was giving. They were realizing how thin their safety net really was without me at the center. And people who realize the ground is gone tend to lash out. So I sat on the edge of my bed with the envelope in my hand one last time, reading Dad's few lines like a map. The lawyer would meet me in the morning to finalize the transfer. The flight would take me out of town before noon. The bank freezes would be active. The forwarded documents would be in relatives' inboxes. The house would no longer be a place they could take for granted. I texted my lawyer to confirm the meeting. I packed the last things that felt like me. My laptop, a stack of notebooks, a small photo of Dad, and closed the door quietly behind me. As I locked the front door, the house was asleep, but the group chat erupted into a new flurry of messages. Some were pleading, some accusatory, and one short message cut through the rest. Mom had called the police, saying I was missing, and she feared for my welfare. That one line stopped me in my tracks. I had prepared for legal battles and social fallout, for accusations and relatives' gossip. I had not expected an immediate escalation to involve authorities. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from an unknown number. The lawyer said to keep going, to let them call, to not respond without advice. But the voice in my head, Dad's voice, my own plan, told me to breathe and move. I had already committed to walking away. There was no turning back. I held a cab to the airport, envelope folded in my pocket, heart racing in a different rhythm now. The group chat messages multiplied. My sister posted a video from the kitchen, Mom crying, repeating my name, while my brother filmed the front door, saying into the camera that I shouldn't get away with this. Comments poured in from relatives. People I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly ringing my phone and sending friend requests on social media. Halfway to the airport, my phone vibrated again. This time, the lawyer's number flashed. He sounded clipped. The kind of voice lawyers use when the paperwork has one last wrinkle. Leo, we have a problem. Someone filed an emergency injunction to freeze the transfer. They're claiming undue influence. They want the notarization reviewed immediately. He paused. It's not automatic, but it could delay, or worse, reopen the case. You need to decide whether to come back and handle this in person, or let me fight it from here. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my gut. They were fighting back in a way I had seen coming, but hoped wouldn't happen. A legal gambit designed to stall and muddy the waters. They'd found a lawyer who would throw obstacles into the process, maybe even call in favors. They were trying to use the system's slowness against me. I closed my eyes and remembered Dad's handwriting, the way he trusted me. The lawyer's words echoed. I had two choices. Go back and face a drawn-out legal fight, which might give them time to turn public opinion against me, or keep moving and let the legal process follow its course from a distance, while I insulated myself and prepared for a protracted battle. Before I could decide, another message came through the group chat. It was a video my sister had posted live. A shaky, breathless clip of her and Mom at the kitchen table. Mom speaking to the camera with a shaky voice. He's leaving, she said. He's taking everything. Then she held up something to the lens. A paper. A bill, a letter. My stomach dropped. The frame zoomed just enough for me to see writing that made my blood run cold. A letter about a bounced payment, an eviction notice. I couldn't tell which, but the implication was clear. They were going to try to force a crisis that made me look like the bad guy. The cab pulled up to the terminal. My hand hovered over the envelope. The lawyer's message had made one thing clear. They had resources, and they would use whatever they could to drag me into a fight that would be messy in public. They had learned to claw. I had planned to walk away and let the law do its work cleanly. Now there was a real risk of the fight becoming anything but clean. I swallowed, zipped my bag, and stepped out into the wind. My phone continued to vibrate. Behind me, in the house I had paid off and loved in secret, my family's panic was becoming a live theater of accusation and fear. In front of me, my future waited, uncertain, yes, but free of the quiet violence I had lived with for years. As I stepped into the terminal, I felt that single thin thread of control tighten. I still had options. I still had the lawyer, the paperwork, my savings, and Dad's words. I still had a plane ticket, and a plan that had been forged in silence and patience. But I also sensed that the next moves would not be entirely mine to make. Their panic could spiral into something ugly, a public spectacle, a legal tangle that would drag on for months, or a desperate last-minute ploy to keep what they believed they owned. I moved through security, the envelope almost burning a hole against my ribs. On the other side of the glass doors, their messages kept coming, louder now. A new one appeared as I queued at the gate. My sister had posted something on social media, a live plea, a claim that I was abandoning them and taking advantage of Mom. It was designed to rally sympathy and make me look like the villain. I hovered over the message, thumb poised, and then the plane announcement called my flight. My seat was assigned. The engines wound up like a decision. I could turn back, cancel everything, walk into the house and face them, risking a drawn-out, messy fight where they might chip away at the legal facts with rumor and manipulation. Or I could get on that plane and let the law and my lawyer do their worst and best work. I took a breath and stood. The terminal buzzed with 1,000 small lives moving forward. I folded the envelope and tucked it deeper into my pocket. I walked down the jetway and felt, for the first time, the vertigo of stepping out of the orbit that had defined my life for decades. As the plane pushed back from the gate, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from an unknown number. There were 4 words, simple and precise. We need to talk. I watched the house shrink in the distance through the small oval window. My family's world receding into a patchwork of roofs and streets. The legal machinery would churn. The relatives would gossip. My sister would try to marshal pity. I had done the smart, calm thing. Exposed the truth with documents, removed immediate access, and insulated myself financially. I had set the stage for their humiliation. But as the plane climbed, reality settled into me like gravity. Revenge had been executed, yes, but the fallout was only beginning. They would try to fight back with lawyers and lies, with public sympathy and last-ditch legal filings. The next moves would be messy. And right now, as the clouds swallowed the city, I realized I had one more decision left, how I would see this through without becoming the thing I despised. The message, "We need to talk," hung on the screen like a dare. I had won the first round, but the war was not over. The plane leveled off. My hands were sweaty, and the envelope in my pocket felt heavier than ever. The fallout didn't come like thunder. It came like erosion, steady, undeniable, stripping away everything my family thought they had until there was nothing left to cling to. The morning after my flight, I met with my lawyer in the new city. We finalized the paperwork, stamped and certified. The property was mine, beyond dispute. The injunction my sister had filed, that desperate, last-ditch attempt to muddy the waters, was dismissed almost instantly. The judge saw right through it. "Undue influence," the lawyer repeated later, shaking his head. "Impossible, Leo. Your father's notarization is airtight. They're wasting time and money." It was official. The house they treated as theirs. The house they had laughed about at dinners. The house they assumed they'd inherit. It was mine. Not out of vengeance, but out of Dad's trust. But consequences are never just legal. They are social, financial, and emotional. And in the weeks that followed, I watched the story collapse in real time. First came the money troubles. Without me footing the bills, reality hit hard. Mom's credit cards maxed out faster than she admitted. My brother's flashy toys started disappearing, sold online for half their value. My sister, still clinging to her pride, tried to keep up appearances, posting pictures as if life were normal. But relatives started to whisper, "If they're doing so well, why did Leo have to carry them all those years?" The letter had been circulated, my quiet work. Dad's words spoke louder than anything I could have said, and the truth stuck. Mom tried to calm me at first, pleading, then yelling, then crying. I let most go unanswered, but once I picked up, her voice cracked through the phone. "Leo, you don't understand. I was just trying to hold the family together," she whimpered. "By erasing me?" I asked. Silence. Then in a whisper, "You were supposed to give. That's who you were." The words chilled me. She hadn't seen me as a son. Not for years. She'd seen me as a resource, a foundation stone she could walk on while praising the walls she built with my support. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. My siblings reacted differently. My brother sent angry texts, threats even. "You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back." But within a month, he quieted down. Friends had stopped loaning him money. The gym he bragged about couldn't keep him without fees paid. Pride doesn't fill the gas tank. My sister, though, tried to spin. She went on social media claiming I had stolen from Mom, posting tearful videos where she painted me as greedy, heartless. At first, some relatives chimed in offering sympathy. But the truth is, wait. Slowly, people began asking the obvious. If Leo was so selfish, why was he the one paying the mortgage? Why was he covering your tuition deposits? Why is his name on the deed in your father's handwriting? Her narrative cracked. She deleted the videos. The silence that followed was louder than her posts had ever been. The final blow came months later when Mom called one last time. Her voice was steady, resigned. "They don't respect me anymore," she said. "Your brother blames me. Your sister won't look at me. Everyone thinks I used you." I didn't reply. What was there to say? She had used me. And now, stripped of that illusion, she was left with the truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub salt in the wound. Revenge, when it's clean, doesn't need gloating. The documents, the silence, the empty fridge at their house. Those spoke louder than any words. As for me, life opened. My relocation solidified into a permanent position. My income grew. I signed the lease on an apartment with high ceilings and quiet mornings, a space that felt like mine. For the first time, I hung pictures on walls that didn't feel borrowed. I filled the fridge with food I chose. I woke up without dread pressing down on my chest. Freedom wasn't loud. It was a steady hum of peace. Sometimes at night, I'd pull out the letter again. Dad's words, shaky but strong, reminded me, "You're stronger than they think. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I'd fold it carefully, slide it back into its envelope and smile. He had seen me. He had known, even when no one else did. The house back home eventually fell quiet. I stopped hearing about it, except in passing from relatives who told me Mom kept mostly to herself now. My siblings drifting off into their own struggles. They no longer had the foundation stone they built their castles on. The castles crumbled. And me. I didn't look back. Not out of cruelty, but because the past no longer had chains strong enough to hold me. The last time I drove past that street, the house standing there, proud and silent, I didn't stop. I didn't need to. It was mine. But more importantly, I was no longer theirs. That was the real revenge. I took the letter from my pocket, glanced at Dad's handwriting one last time, and whispered into the quiet car, "I made it, Dad. You were right." Then I slid it back into its envelope, turned up the music, and drove toward the life I had built on my own terms. So, tell me, after hearing all of this, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family who just couldn't see you, or who tried to control your life? I'm genuinely curious to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below.